Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She laughed when she said it. Not loudly, not cruelly, just enough to make it sound reasonable. It happened on a Tuesday night, the kind that pretends to be ordinary so you don't guard yourself. We were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, the TV glowing with some half-watched show on Disney+, the sound low, like background noise in a waiting room. I had leaned toward her, not even touching, just closing the space. I remember thinking how familiar that distance used to be. Later, she told a friend she hadn't meant it like an insult, that it was just an observation, that I was too needy, always wanting closeness, always wanting connection, as if intimacy were a bad habit I never grew out of. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain that for me, closeness wasn't hunger. It was structure. The same way I designed buildings, load-bearing points, quiet alignment, things that held because they were meant to. I just leaned back and let the space return to where she preferred it. I run a small architecture studio downtown. Nothing flashy. Long projects. Patient clients. The kind of work where trust builds slowly and collapses all at once if you're careless. She used to say she admired that about me. How steady I was. How I didn't rush. That night, she turned back to her phone, scrolling, smiling at something I wasn't part of. I watched her profile in the blue light and realized I had been asking for permission to be close to my own wife. And she had been answering with jokes. Later, after I left the office, I sat in my Dodge Ram for a long time before turning the engine on. I didn't want to go home. Not because there was yelling or tension. There wasn't. That was the problem. The house had gone neutral. Like a space stripped of purpose. I drove instead. Past familiar streets. Past places we used to stop together. I ended up nowhere special, just circling until the silence felt normal. What she didn't understand was that I wasn't offended by her words. I was informed by them. She thought calling my need for intimacy a weakness would make me quiet. She was right about that. She just didn't realize what silence was the first step toward. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It arrived in small absences she didn't notice because she was used to me filling every gap. I stopped reaching for her first. Not dramatically. Not in a way that begged to be seen. I just let my hands stay where they were. I let evenings pass without trying to bridge the quiet. When she spoke, I listened. When she didn't, I didn't chase the silence anymore. At work, things were different. The studio was busy in the steady, controlled way I liked. Projects moving forward, deadlines holding. Mark was everywhere, like he always was. My lead manager. My right hand. He knew the clients, the files, the rhythms of how I worked. I trusted him with access because I trusted him with intent. I noticed things then that I might have brushed off before. How he lingered a little longer when my wife stopped by the office. How they shared looks that didn't include me. Nothing obvious. Nothing you could accuse. Just familiarity where there shouldn't have been any. At home, she filled the quiet with commentary. About her articles. About people online she found ridiculous. About how exhausting it was to explain things to men who confused emotional dependence with depth. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. The room already knew who she meant. I started eating alone more often. Late nights turned into quick stops at McDonald's, the kind you don't mention because they're not about food. They're about not sitting across from someone who treats your presence like background noise. I'd eat in the car, watching people come and go, thinking about how strange it was that strangers shared more warmth with each other in passing than we did at home. The first real confirmation didn't come as shock. It came as alignment. A calendar overlap that didn't make sense. A meeting Mark said ran late on a night my wife came home distracted, humming, lighter than she'd been in weeks. The pieces didn't rush together. They settled, like a plan that finally made sense once you saw the full drawing. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't check phones. I didn't demand clarity. I just stopped investing where the return was already gone. That weekend, she mentioned Sam's Club, asked if we needed anything. I told her no. It was the first shared routine I declined. She noticed that. She just didn't understand why it mattered. What I was doing wasn't punishment. It was preparation. I was learning how much space the truth would need once it arrived. Evidence doesn't always arrive as discovery. Sometimes it shows up as confirmation of what your body already accepted. I didn't go looking for proof. I didn't need to. Once I stopped asking for closeness, patterns surfaced on their own. Empty spaces reveal structure better than pressure ever does. That's something you learn when you design for a living. At the studio, Mark started handling things he never had before. Client follow-ups I usually signed off on. Vendor calls he didn't flag. He moved with confidence that suggested rehearsal. Like someone who knew the boundaries had shifted but assumed I wouldn't redraw them. At home, my wife grew lighter. Less irritated. Less guarded. She laughed more, but not with me. Her phone stayed angled away, always just enough to feel intentional. She'd disappear into the bedroom to answer messages and come back calmer, as if tension had been siphoned off somewhere else. I began staying later at the office, not to watch them, but to give the truth room to surface without interference. It did. One evening, I returned earlier than expected. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I could hear her voice through the cracked window, low and unguarded. She wasn't talking to a friend. There was a softness there I hadn't heard directed at me in years. I didn't listen long. I didn't need details. Tone tells you everything content tries to hide. The next day, I went to Home Depot after work. I told myself it was for supplies. A minor repair I'd been postponing. In reality, I was testing something else. How it felt to move forward without including her. To make decisions without checking if they fit someone else's mood. It felt clean. I didn't confront Mark. I didn't mention my wife. I adjusted access quietly. Files migrated. Permissions changed. I watched how long it took him to notice. At home, I stopped sharing plans. She noticed that faster. Asked questions she hadn't asked in months. Not about feelings. About logistics. About where I was, when I'd be back. Control searching for a new anchor. That night, she sat closer on the couch. Not touching. Just nearer. As if proximity alone could re-establish something she'd already dismantled. The TV murmured. She waited for me to lean in. I didn't. What she mistook for emotional need had always been intention. And intention, once withdrawn, doesn't announce itself. It just leaves a shape behind. She was starting to feel it. I was already building around it. I didn't announce my withdrawal. I let it register the way temperature does, gradually, then all at once. I stopped coming home at predictable hours. Not to punish. Not to provoke. I just let my schedule belong to me again. Late nights at the studio became normal. Early mornings happened without explanation. I answered questions with facts, never reassurance. The tone stayed neutral. Calm enough to be unsettling. She filled the space with commentary at first. Observations. Jokes. Small attempts to pull me back into rhythm. When that didn't work, she shifted to concern. Asked if I was tired. Asked if something was wrong. She never asked if she was. One Friday, I didn't come home at all. I turned my phone off halfway through the evening and let the city move without me attached to it. I stayed at a quiet place near the river. Nothing fancy, somewhere anonymous enough to think clearly. In the morning, I woke up rested for the first time in months. I checked messages later. Missed calls stacked neatly, like proof without noise. I didn't return them. Back at work, Mark hit resistance for the first time. Files he expected weren't accessible. Decisions stalled without my approval. He tried to smooth it over with confidence, but confidence doesn't replace authority when structure changes. I watched from a distance. Let the system respond naturally. At home, she moved through rooms like she was looking for something she'd misplaced. Not me. Control. The certainty that I would always be where she left me. She put on background noise at night, scrolling on her phone, letting Disney Plus play without watching. The house filled with sound, but not presence. I stayed away. Let her sit with it. On Sunday, I stopped by Sam's Club out of habit, then left without buying anything. Another small routine severed. Another quiet signal I didn't send. The following week, I listed furniture on Facebook Marketplace. Pieces we'd chosen together. Items she'd insisted to find our space. I didn't explain why they were leaving. They just did. She noticed the empty corners before she noticed my absence. Asked where things had gone. I told her they were sold. No tone. No apology. That night, she sat across from me at the table and waited for something to happen. A confrontation. An explanation. A request. I gave her none of it. I wasn't disappearing to be chased. I was stepping out of a structure that no longer supported me. She thought silence meant indecision. For me, it was execution. And once it started, there was no reversing it. The collapse didn't come from exposure. It came from subtraction. At the studio, Mark started to feel it before he understood it. Meetings shortened. Decisions slowed. People stopped looping him in automatically. Not because I told them to, but because the system adjusted to where authority actually lived. I let that happen. I didn't defend my position. I just occupied it fully. He tried to compensate, took initiative where permission used to be required, spoke for me in rooms I hadn't entered yet. It only made the contrast sharper. Confidence without backing always reveals itself eventually. I watched from a distance. Not emotionally, structurally, like a flaw developing underweight. At home, my wife sensed the shift but misread its direction. She assumed my distance meant uncertainty, that I was struggling, that eventually I'd need reassurance the way I used to ask for intimacy. She started leaving small gestures around the house. A note, a favorite meal, familiar tactics deployed too late. One night, she waited up for me. I didn't come home. I stopped at McDonald's instead, parked under a flickering light, eating slowly, thinking about how hunger works. How it disappears once you stop feeding the wrong source. The next morning, I met with a client Mark had been handling closely. I didn't accuse him. I didn't imply betrayal. I just asked specific questions. Quiet ones. About timelines. About communication. About things that hadn't been delivered the way they were promised. The answers were enough. I didn't push further. I let the client draw their own conclusions. By the end of the week, Mark was no longer leading that account. Not because I took it from him, because it moved away on its own. At home, my wife grew restless. She checked her phone more often, disappeared into rooms that no longer felt private. The calm she'd borrowed elsewhere was starting to cost her. She asked me once if I was seeing someone. Not accusing, measuring. I told her no. It was the truth. I wasn't investing anywhere emotionally. I was closing accounts. That weekend, I went back to Home Depot. Picked up tools I didn't need urgently. It wasn't about repair. It was about ownership, about touching something solid and knowing exactly what it was for. Mark asked for a meeting the following Monday. His tone was different. Careful. He sensed the ground shifting beneath him and wanted to locate the fault line. I agreed to meet, not to confront him, to confirm that he already knew, and that the structure he'd been hiding inside was no longer bearing his weight. The meeting with Mark lasted less than 20 minutes. No raised voices, no accusations. Just a calm review of responsibilities and boundaries that no longer needed explanation. He talked more than I did. People do that when they're trying to locate leverage that's already gone. I didn't fire him. I didn't threaten him. I simply reassigned authority in ways that reflected reality. Access narrowed. Decisions rerouted. By the time he realized what had happened, it looked less like punishment and more like inevitability. Word travels fast when nothing dramatic happens. Colleagues noticed before my wife did. At industry events, people stopped asking where she was. Invitations came addressed only to me. I declined most of them, not out of spite, but because I was done performing continuity. At home, she felt the shift through other people first. A friend mentioned I'd been seen alone at a gallery opening. Another asked if everything was okay because you seem separate lately. She laughed it off, said I was busy, said I needed space. She said it like a temporary condition. I let her. She tried to pull me back into public alignment. Suggested a dinner with friends. A weekend trip. Something visible. I said I had deadlines. That part was true. I was redesigning my life with the same patience I used for buildings. One evening, she sat across from me while Disney Plus played in the background, volume 2 low to matter. She talked about work, about an article that had stirred backlash. She waited for my input. For reassurance. For engagement. I nodded. I listened. I didn't lean in. That night, she scrolled through Facebook Marketplace on her phone, paused on listings I'd posted. Furniture she recognized. Pieces she hadn't noticed were missing until strangers showed interest. She asked when I'd put them up. I told her it didn't matter anymore. The next weekend, she went to Sam's Club alone. Came back with things we used to buy together. She lined them up in the kitchen like proof of continuity. I thanked her. I didn't use them. Her tone changed after that. Less ironic. Less sharp. She started asking questions she used to mock. About how I was feeling. About whether we were okay. I didn't answer in ways she could work with. The absence of reaction unsettles people more than anger ever does. She was losing ground socially, emotionally, quietly. Not because I exposed anything. Because I stopped holding her place in the structure. And once that support was gone, everyone could see the imbalance for themselves. Isolation doesn't announce itself. It settles in quietly, after the noise leaves. By then, She was the only one still pretending things were normal. Friends had adjusted their language around her. Colleagues stopped asking about me altogether. My absence had become a fact instead of a question, and facts don't invite discussion. At home, she moved closer again. Not physically at first. Emotionally. She watched me instead of her phone, asked how my day had been, and waited for the answer. I gave her the surface version. Deadlines. Permits. Client revisions. Safe terrain. She filled the evenings with sound, letting Disney Plus run episode after episode, not because she was watching, but because silence had started to press on her. I stayed present without being involved. In the same room. On the same couch. Completely unreachable. That kind of distance is disorienting. There's no argument to respond to. No accusation to defend against. Just a person who no longer reacts the way you expect them to. She tried memory next. Brought up trips we'd taken. Early years. Inside jokes. Moments she used to dismiss as sentimental. She framed them carefully, like offerings. I acknowledged them the way you acknowledge a past address. Accurate. Detached. At work, the shift had settled. Mark avoided me now. Not out of guilt. Out of clarity. He understood his position without it ever being spelled out. Systems do that when you let them finish their own sentences. One night, she waited for me to come to bed. I stayed up later than usual, reviewing drawings I didn't need to review. When I finally lay down, she turned toward me, hesitated, then reached out, fingers brushing my arm. It felt unfamiliar. Not because I didn't want closeness, but because the source mattered. She'd mocked the need when it was mine. Now it arrived as a response to loss. I didn't pull away. I didn't lean in. She whispered my name once. Just once. Testing whether it still worked. I didn't answer. That was the moment her composure cracked. Not visibly. Internally. You could feel it in the way her breathing changed. In the way her hand lingered longer than necessary. The irony didn't move me. By the time she needed what I used to offer freely, I had already learned how to live without asking for it. Isolation had done its work. She was alone while sitting right next to me, and I had never felt more intact. She finally stopped circling it and stepped straight into the space I'd left open on purpose. It happened on an ordinary evening, which is how these moments usually arrive. No build-up, no warning, just timing. I came home later than usual, not exhausted, just finished. She was waiting at the table, lights on, phone face down. No background noise. Disney Plus was off. Silence, intentional this time. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She asked questions that sounded like they'd been rehearsed and revised. Whether something had changed. Whether I was still committed. Whether there was someone else. Each one framed as concern, not confrontation. I answered carefully, but briefly. I told her nothing external had pulled me away. That there was no affair on my side. That work was fine. That I was fine. That was the first crack. She had expected a villain. Something she could argue against. What she got instead was a man who no longer needed to be convinced of his own reality. She shifted closer, physically this time. Talked about us in present tense. About reconnecting. About how she hadn't realized how much distance had grown between us. She said people make mistakes when they get comfortable. She said comfort kills desire, like she was quoting something she'd once written. I let her finish. Then I told her, calmly, that intimacy isn't something you mock and then request back on different terms. I didn't raise examples. I didn't say names. I didn't mention Mark. I didn't need to. Her eyes moved when I said it. Just slightly. Enough. She asked if this was punishment. I told her no. That punishment requires engagement. What she was experiencing was absence. She tried urgency next. Told me she felt like she was losing me. That she needed me. The word landed between us, heavy with timing. I didn't react. I explained that when I asked for closeness, it was called neediness. When I stopped asking, it became distance. And distance, once accepted, doesn't reverse because someone finally feels uncomfortable. She reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. I didn't squeeze back. That's when she understood this wasn't a negotiation. There was no argument to win. No apology that could reset the balance. She wasn't talking to the man who had wanted intimacy. She was talking to the man who had learned what life felt like without asking for it. And that man wasn't coming back into the conversation. Collapse doesn't look dramatic when it's real. It looks quiet. Administrative. Like doors closing without slamming. After that conversation, she unraveled in ways she couldn't control. Not in public outbursts, but in inconsistencies. She missed deadlines, snapped at people she used to charm. Her confidence thinned, and without it, there wasn't much left to shield her. The tone she'd built her career on stopped working when no one felt impressed anymore. The other structure fell faster. Mark stopped coming in early, then started leaving before 5. His authority evaporated the moment people realized it had been borrowed. Projects stalled. Clients asked questions. The studio didn't implode. It corrected. Systems always do when weak points remove themselves. He resigned 2 weeks later. Said it was about new opportunities. No one asked where. I didn't either. At home, the atmosphere shifted from tension to vacancy. She moved through the house like a guest overstaying, unsure where to put her things. She tried conversation again, softer this time. Less framing, more exposure. She talked about feeling invisible, about not sleeping, about realizing too late what she'd dismissed too early. I listened without interruption, not because I was considering anything, because closure deserves witnesses, even when reconciliation doesn't. She started noticing the final absences then, that the dining chairs were gone, that the shelves were lighter, that listings on Facebook Marketplace had closed without her seeing who'd picked things up. Our shared history was being dismantled quietly, piece by piece, without ceremony. One night, she asked where I went when I didn't come home. Not accusing, needing context. I told her sometimes I drove. Sometimes I ate late. Mentioned McDonald's once, casually, like it didn't matter. The detail unsettled her more than a confession would have. It meant my comfort no longer depended on her presence. She cried alone, not theatrically, privately. I could hear it through walls. I didn't intervene. Comfort given too late isn't comfort. It's interference. The realization hit her in fragments. That the intimacy she mocked had been the last thread tying us together. That when she finally needed it, I had already redistributed my life around its absence. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindicated. I was finished. And she could feel that whatever version of me she needed now no longer lived in this house. The collapse wasn't loud, but it was complete. The end didn't arrive as a decision. It arrived as clarity. There was no final argument. No packed bags moment. Just a morning where everything felt settled in a way it never had before. I woke up early, not restless, not heavy. Calm in the way that only comes when something is already over inside you. She was asleep when I moved through the house. I didn't try to be quiet. I didn't need to be loud. I made coffee, stood by the window, watched the street wake up without us. The life outside had continued perfectly well while we were dissolving inside these walls. Later that day, she tried once more. Not with sarcasm, not with analysis, with honesty stripped of performance. She told me she finally understood what she'd mocked. That intimacy wasn't weakness. That needing someone didn't make them small. She said she needed me now. Said the word carefully, like it might still open a door. I listened, fully, without interruption. Then I told her the truth she wasn't prepared for. That her realization didn't offend me. It just arrived too late to matter. That intimacy isn't a switch you turn back on when loneliness becomes inconvenient. It's a practice. And practices, once abandoned long enough, don't resume where you left them. She asked if there was anything left to save. I didn't answer right away. Not to create drama. To be accurate. I told her I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. The house emptied slowly after that. Not in a single sweep. In stages. I sold what was left through Facebook Marketplace. The final pieces of a shared space finding new homes without ceremony. She watched, understanding now that nothing was being taken from her. I was simply reclaiming myself. On my last night there, I slept well. No music. No background noise. No Disney Plus murmuring through the walls. Just silence that didn't demand anything from me. In the morning, I left without looking back. Not because it hurt. Because it didn't. She had laughed at my desire for intimacy. I removed myself from the equation. And when the quiet finally became unbearable for her, it was already the place I had learned to live in without needing anyone at all. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.